Hello, welcome everyone to another episode of the Virtual Ninja Show. My name is Heike and I will be your host. Today it's all about Microsoft Defender for Endpoint on Linux, and I'm so happy to got John back on the show. Welcome back, John.
Thanks for having me back, Heike.
So, John, last time when I had you on the show, we did an amazing overview of what Defender for Endpoint actually is. Today, you are back talking about Linux. So, how comes? Like, how long have you been interested in this topic? And yeah, what made you excited and offering me being on my show again, talking about this topic?
Well, actually, in my history, in my personal life, I started with Linux when I was first kind of experimenting with computers. So I had some Windows, but a lot more Linux. I ran Linux full time as a desktop for many years. Worked in a Linux heavy environment for a long time, and so I've had a lot of history with Linux, and then supported Linux in various flavors and uses and all sorts of different areas over my career up till now. So getting an opportunity to work with Defender for Endpoint on Linux, and specifically with customers who are deploying Defender for Endpoint on Linux, is just really exciting to me, to be honest with you.
So glad that we actually got you because, it's amazing to have people understand the topic. And as probably many know, we came from a Windows world and then we moved on to expand across different platforms. So having experts is not just given, right? So thank you. So talking about Linux, there is not just one, like similar to other operating systems. There is different operating systems. In Linux, it's called distros. Can you share a little bit about where we have support for and where that comes from, maybe historically?
Yeah, so Linux has a lot of different distributions, and most of the distributions out there for Linux are actually just forks of existing distributions with their own changes. So I actually have this great graph here that goes through all of the distributions that are available and what the timeline of those different distributions are. And as you can see here, it is an extremely long and exhaustive list. So
Wow.
Linux is very, very interesting in this regard in terms of history and development and maintenance and all of these things, compared to Windows. So yeah, so let's talk about the distributions that are supported by Defender for Endpoint specifically. So these are going to be different distributions that are commonly found across different enterprises or maybe supported by organizations for enterprise use. So primarily these are, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, 7.2 and higher. This includes RHEL 8 and 9. You've got CentOS support 7.2 and higher. You've got Ubuntu support for 16.04 on the LTS branch and higher, so 20.04, 22.04. You've got Debian 9 and higher. You've got SUSE Linux Enterprise Server 12 and higher. And you've got Oracle Linux 7.2 and higher, along with Oracle Linux 8. We also have Amazon Linux 2 and Fedora 33 and higher. So we're really trying to cover a large number of distributions that are, again, commonly found in different environments for enterprise use, development use, things like that, that you might find out there for customers.
So you showed that crazy graph thingy. So when you think about the distro that is supported by us and someone is branching out, what does it mean from a support perspective?
Well, unfortunately, we can't support all distributions, and the reason why is because anything can change, once a distribution is forked. The support models can change, the maintainers can change. There's a lot of different things, a lot of different variables out there. And what we want to try to do is maintain stability and consistency, with the data that we're collecting across all of those different platforms. So we're really focusing in on, these good distros that have, features that we're using to collect that data that's already integrated into the kernel, so that we're not introducing, any sort of instability into those distributions. So really we're focusing on distributions that, again, are kind of common and widely used in the enterprise.
So I would assume an enterprise is also not using one of those, you call them forked, I call them branched distros usually, like they stay with the main build.
So for the most part, enterprises use, these or the distribution versions that I kind of outlined here. You do find some enterprises that are using different, distributions for different purposes and things like that. So it's really a good mix. But again, we're trying to target, as much of the enterprise space as possible here with Defender for Endpoint. So it's not commonly found, but it certainly is found where you'll have distributions that are unsupported.
Cool. So now we have Linux support already for a long time, but over the time we introduced the addition of new features and new scenarios. So what are the, because I can't list them all because it's like a lot of features are available, but what are your favorite features that are available as well on all the platforms, also on Linux?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you mentioned, we've been out for a while. So we initially released the AV components and then later followed up and added the EDR components. And that to me just gives, a lot of the visibility that you're used to on the Windows side now in the Linux space. So you've got security researchers that are really able to get that, single pane of glass view across all of their different devices. The features that I really like when it comes to Defender for Endpoint on Linux are, the TVM integrated functionality. So you can see, these are, vulnerable different packages that might be running on your Linux devices. This always shines a great light on, overall, update management across different teams within the organization. So that's really good. Another thing that we integrated somewhat recently was device health status. So, right away, if you've got an incident with a particular device, you can take a quick look and see, what version of Defender for Endpoint is running on this, what version of the signatures are running on that particular device. You really kind of get that at a glance view there. A couple of things I'm super excited about that are currently in public preview today are live response. So again, it gives you, more in-depth ability to be able to, manage these devices remotely in response to an active incident, and network protection, which is another great feature that has been widely requested by customers, to be added to the Linux environment. So super excited about both of those that are in public preview today.
Awesome. So why don't we get started on basically getting an endpoint onboarded? How does it work? How does it look like? I want to see some black shells where you're typing some crazy stuff and not clicking.
Yeah, exactly. Like all the hacker movies out there, right?
Yes.
All right, so we'll start this demo out in the Microsoft 365 Defender portal here. And once you go to the settings page, you'll just go down here to endpoints, and then you'll scroll down a little bit to onboarding. And then from onboarding, you'll hit this drop down, you'll choose Linux server. And from here, you've got two different deployment methods. You've got a local script method, and then you've got basically what's going to be downloaded is a management JSON file that you can distribute through, Ansible, Puppet, or Chef. And we'll actually talk a little bit more about, managing the Linux distribution or managing Defender for Endpoint on Linux using those tools here in a little bit. But for this demo, I'm just going to download the local script to be able to use that. And then there's a detection test here at the bottom if you just want to make sure, after you've downloaded, after you've deployed, after you've onboarded, if you just want to run a quick iCard test and make sure that there's a detection there, then you'll see that. So let's take a look at the instructions to actually deploy Defender for Endpoint on Linux. And that's all documented really well in our documentation. It goes through a lot of the prerequisites, the requirements. We go through the different distributions, the different package managers that might be used. There's a lot of steps here as part of this, as I can see your eyes kind of bugging out. So what we've done is actually made this much easier by creating this MDE installer script. So this MDE installer script basically will handle all of the prerequisite steps, do the deployment, and even do the onboarding if the onboarding file has been transferred to the device. So if you're brand new to Linux, if you're in security operations and you want to just take a look at, hey, what can we do? What can we see on Linux? this is one of the things that you can go through to kind of get started very, very, very quickly.
So then why would someone go through all those extra individual steps? Like when you say, oh, you're new, you just want to test this out. So who are the other people who go through the entire manual step by step?
Well, I'll ask you this, Heike. How do you like to buy your Legos? All already built or in pieces that you like to build?
Uh, in pieces.
In pieces, right. So some people want to learn about the process step by step. You start learning about the required packages. You start to learn about version control. You start to learn about some of the channel pieces. So there's a lot of different, variables as part of this deployment. This is a way that you can get it up very quick and easy so that you can start working with it right away.
Okay. And now what do I do with that script?
Well, I'm glad you asked. What do you do there? So you wanted the black console screen, you got the black console screen. So let's take a look here. I basically set up a very quick Linux device to be able to use as a demo here. What you can see here is a demo Linux device. It's just running Ubuntu 2004. And on this particular device, I've downloaded the Defender ATP onboarding Linux server Python script. I've also downloaded the MDE installer script right here. All right, let's go ahead and try installing Defender for Endpoint using this easy script. So we're just going to do a sudo, which is really just run as root here, the MDE install script, -I because we want to install it, -C because we're going to go ahead and choose the production channel. We've got 3 different channels: Insider Fast, Insider Slow, and Production. This allows you to test pre-production versions before they get into production if you've got a QA or pre-production environments. Then we want to go ahead and automate the onboarding. So we're going to tell it where the script actually is. And then we are going to enforce the minimum requirements. And here we go. So everything is getting installed right now as far as prerequisites go. Everything that we set up before, it's checked the prerequisites in this box to make sure the minimum RAM, the minimum CPU, and the minimum amount of disk is available on this system. So it's safe to install. And here you can see that it's basically installing the Defender for Endpoint package. And then it will actually do the onboarding part of this. So again, kind of all of those long steps before is made one single line for installing Defender for Endpoint on the server for your enjoyment. Heike and I's got to go. All right, so that took a few minutes, but now we've got Defender for Endpoint installed. It is up to date. It is now onboarded. It is now part of your environment. So the first thing we can do is run mdatp space health, and we can see the actual output of this particular command shows you that this device is in a healthy state, and it shows you what application version you're using. It shows you that it's actually licensed, which really just means that it's onboarded, and then it gives you all the information about how it's configured, what release ring it's in, the last time it was updated, and some of the feature statuses here. So this is pretty much it. At this point, you can switch back into the portal and actually look at this device in the portal.
So John, I know usually this now takes a little while to get that machine actually onboarded or like visible in the portal. Let's just have a look maybe at a different Linux machine whilst this other one is still connecting. How it looks like, what people can see.
Yeah, sure. So let's start here in the portal, and this is just another device while we wait for the other one to finish the onboarding process. So as you can see here, that's the device name. You've got all the different device details here. And then you've got that health status that I referred to before. So what you've got here are the security intelligence update versions, the Defender AV mode, so you can see whether it's an active or passive. You can actually see what platform version is being used on this device. You can see this device is a little bit older than the one that we actually installed recently. But then you've still got, your alerts, and you've even got your timeline page here that's going to come up.
Before let's wait for that. Quick question. You on the overview page, you actually showed us the updates. So how will a new engine or something that we release be updated on a Linux machine? Is this automatically done, or does someone need to do something?
Well, that's a great segue into how Linux devices are really managed and how Defender for Endpoint is managed on those Linux devices. So Since we integrate to the built-in package manager, you can imagine that the package manager is very similar to Windows Update in that regard. So since we integrate with the package manager, it's a function of using that package manager to keep Defender for Endpoint up to date. So really the question comes down to, how are you updating the existing packages that you have? How frequently are you updating? How are you orchestrating those updates? Are you using a local repo? You can use a local repo for the Defender for Endpoint updates, so that way you can kind of manually sync those and deploy those locally if that's what you want to do there. So really the goal in managing and maintaining Defender for Endpoint on Linux was to make it as easy as possible to integrate into existing Linux management solutions, existing Linux update solutions, by adhering to all of the same standards as other applications do for Linux. So you can see that we've got the timeline view here, which gives you a very familiar view from a Windows perspective over into your Linux environment. So, you're able to see a lot of the same activities, a lot of the things that you'd be looking for if you were doing some sort of investigation on a device. So you've got some process creations here. You got your different network login events, things like that that you'll actually see on these particular devices. So again, it gives you a lot of that same, visibility and, again, kind of some of the same views that you're used to in working with the Windows environment.
Cool. So now we onboarded a device, but I guess there is some settings you want to configure or like topic, I guess, management in general. Like, how does that work?
Sure. So I tell you what, let's go back to our favorite console piece here, and let's take a look at that. So all of these different settings in Defender for Endpoint on Linux can be managed, through the command line. If, you have the right permissions, you can go in there and change any of these settings that you want, or you can create a configuration file to manage those settings. Here we have the MDATP managed JSON file, and I have done a very good job of pre-populating this with a lot of settings that you can control. Now, this is pretty extreme for a configuration file that we would recommend deploying out there, but what I wanted to do was show a lot of the different options that you have available to deploy using this configuration file. So
So that JSON file that was downloaded from the console, right? From the portal.
no, this is something different. This is something that I created following our
Oh,
documentation. So if you
okay.
actually go back to our documentation here, and you actually look at the configuration, and then you look at the preferences piece here, this is where it shows you everything that you can configure in a file. And what it does is it also tells you what the recommended configuration profile is here. And it gives you a sample of the recommended profile. And you can see that mine is much larger than this one, but it was simply to illustrate the different features that you can actually configure should you choose to configure those as part of the configuration profile. So once all of these settings are set here, in this configuration file, what you'll want to do is just simply copy the managed JSON file into the proper location. And at that point, when you run an MDATP health output, you can now see that these settings are actually being managed by the configuration file itself. So all of the items that we just set up through the configuration file are now loaded and being recognized by Defender for Endpoint. So what that means is you can create a JSON managed configuration file, and you can distribute it to the proper location very easily using, Ansible playbooks, Chef cookbooks, any sort of Puppet orchestration that you want if you're using Ansible or Puppet or Chef. We actually have instructions through our documentation on using Ansible, Puppet, and Chef to do these deployments if you've never done them before, or if you'd like to at least have kind of a starting point to go on and using those three platforms. But really anything that you're using to manage these devices that can drop files in specific locations with the right permissions is going to let you, be able to manage Defender for Endpoint on Linux devices.
So, but that's basically a great way of testing everything out on one client. You install it, you have the JSON, the configuration, test it out how it changes things on that endpoint, and then you change it, adjust it, and then you basically use it in your management tool to apply it to multiple machines, right?
Right. Again, the key there is integrating with the management platforms and the methods that you're using today to be able to manage those devices.
Okay, so we have onboarded. We saw a client in the portal. We now changed settings. So, what are the settings that you can, like all the ones that we saw in this huge full example, right? Which is like network protection, live response, everything that we have as features available. You can configure, turn on, turn off.
Yeah, if you want to configure exclusions, for example, if you want to configure, your real-time protection level, call protection levels, things like that, you can do all that stuff. If you just want to enforce it on that device, you can do that through the management file as well.
Okay, that's pretty cool. I mean, it's different than what I'm used to doing like on a Windows machine, but it still looks like straightforward. So, John, talking about MD on Linux, is there anything else you would like to tell people, show people, make people aware of? Anything that you would like to add here in our episode?
Sure. I think adding this level of protection and most importantly, this level of visibility to, an entire environment is obviously very important. So really what I would do is encourage, potential customers of, Defender for Endpoint on Linux to try it out. So hopefully today you've learned how to easily deploy it, how to easily create a management file, and how to start integrating this with your, management processes. Start having conversations with your Linux management teams. Show them some of the documentation that we've got out there for, Ansible, Puppet, or Chef, kind of whatever you're using, and involve them as part of this process here to make sure that you're getting, a well-rounded deployment as far as your environment goes. Take a look at your applications and their requirements. Take a look at the systems, the way that they're configured, and start with one of these devices. Spin up a Linux VM in Azure. Go through the onboarding process using the script that I showed you, and start working with Linux Defender for Endpoint on Linux, and let us know how it goes.
Yes. Talking about letting us know, so if there's any questions, you can either use our tech community forum. You can go on aka.ms/mdetc. You can also go on aka.ms/ninja show, and there is a button, share your voice. If you ask a question, please also add your email address so we can actually answer the question. Otherwise, I answer, but I can't send it to anyone. And of course, don't forget to look out for our announcements either on my Twitter handle or on the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint tech community blog space for all the things that we are releasing. There will be a blog post. I also have a monthly news that include everything that we basically shipped, produced in the past month. Good, John. I think that's a wrap. We talked, I think, about everything we wanted to talk about today in the show. Thank you so much again for being on the show with me, and I'm sure I will invite you again. Again, thank you so much.
No, it's always awesome doing this with you, Heike. Appreciate the invite.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for listening. Thanks everyone for watching the show, and hopefully I'll see you again in the next episode. Bye.